I've decided that it is time to answer the great question: will learning other keyboard instruments destroy piano technique? Now, I'm still fairly new to this whole world of harpsichord and basso continua and organ, so the way I play probably isn't technically correct. I'm sure that a lot of harpsichord teachers and people who are fluent in this realm would say that I'm doing things wrong, but I don't know, it's a constant learning experience, and it's fun to just dig into something that's completely different. Throughout my musical life, I've had many people tell me, as a pianist, that if I start to learn other keyboard instruments like the harpsichord here or the organ, that it will mess with my piano technique. I've had professors tell me this, musical colleagues, and it's happened so often that it made me wonder, is there any validity to what they're saying? I think the line of thinking goes that since these instruments are in fact very different in the way they're played, in the way they sound, the attack, the sustain, and the way that they're used in music, that it could mess with a modern piano technique. But I have to say that in my personal experience, it's been quite the opposite. The more that I learn other instruments and am exposed to different styles of playing and music, the more that informs my music-making decisions, and I feel like it's actually made me a better pianist over the years. So if that's true, then why do so many people think the opposite? Well, we can look a little bit at the mechanics of the instruments themselves, the way they sound, and see just how different they really are. So the mechanics of the harpsichord, like this one, are very different than those of the piano. As you can see, right now it's set up in a double manual setting, so that both of the manuals are playing when I play the bottom one. Or if I play the top one, it has a different sound. And you can also reconfigure this if you pull on this manual here, so that now you get these different layers of sounds. Now for this harpsichord, there is another option with this lever here. If I push it over, I can also get an extra octave in there, which is not in tune. But nevertheless, if it was in tune, you would get an extra octave. And as far as the action of the instrument goes, it does feel quite different than a piano, for instance. If I push here, there's a certain point where there's a resistance, and then it gives way. And that resistance is increased with the two manuals. A couple other differences are the size of the key, the depth of the key, and the black keys, and the way that these keys are a little bit rounded, meaning that I can just take my finger and do a glissando, which you could never do on piano. And the depth of the key itself is very different as well. Now you can see the difference in the mechanism from a piano here. We're used to seeing pianos where a hammer comes up and strikes the string, but on a harpsichord, the strings are plucked. Almost like a guitar pick. And because of that little resistance beforehand, the volume will always be the same, no matter how hard or soft you play on the harpsichord. Now, issues become even more complicated when you're at a harpsichord like this one, which is an earlier model, and it's tuned not in equal temperament, but in what is called a mean tone temperament, or one of the mean tone temperaments. Most of the music that we hear, like 99.9% of the music that is produced nowadays, is in equal temperament, meaning that if you transpose the piece from one key to the next, it'll more or less sound the same. So you have 12 keys, which all have the exact same distance between the notes. But on this instrument, as you'll hear, if you try to play the same piece or the same chord even in a different key, it has a drastically different sound. So when you hear a chord like a C minor chord, it's not the same as a G minor chord, or this, or this. So the way this particular harpsichord is set up, it favors certain keys over others. Some of them sound more in tune. That sounds fine. I mean, it sounds a little bit different, but then we get into keys like this and it just sounds... just sounds awful. So if I take a common piece like Bach's Prelude in C major, and now if I try to play it in a different key, say a half step up, that piece is from a collection called the Well-Tempered Clavier, not the Equal-Tempered Clavier. So he might not have used this exact specific tuning. There are literally hundreds, but it wouldn't be what we're used to today. But being so used to equal temperament, we kind of lose some of the understanding of the relationship between keys, since equal temperament's a compromise. So we lose some of that. Or incidentally, the size of these keys are also different than the harpsichord I played over here, and even the width of the keys is different. I can reach a little bit better than I would be able to on a piano. I can almost reach an 11th. Here is an example of a forte piano, which would have been more like the type of piano that Mozart or earlier Beethoven would have been written on. You can see that the keys are already deeper, a little bit more similar to a modern piano. The color scheme is still backwards, but the key depth itself is still a lot more shallow, and it's still a little bit rounded, so that makes things like this much more easier. Octave glissandi, which are very difficult on a modern piano unless you have a big hand. As far as the mechanism for this instrument, it is more similar to a modern piano. You have these hammers, which we're used to seeing, although it's a little bit simpler. If I play something by Mozart, a famous piano sonata, you can hear the difference between the forte piano and the modern piano. And if I play that same Mozart piece, the attack and the sustain on the forte piano is also different than the modern piano, so the attack is very sharp, and the sustain also dies pretty quickly. Next we have the Baroque portative organ, which is also extremely different in terms of how it feels and how it's played. Again, like the harpsichord, the key length and the key depth, as well as the little roundedness in the keys themselves is similar. There's even less resistance here because there's nothing plucking any string. This is also not equal tempered. It's not quite as jarring as the other harpsichord, but you can hear that it's a little bit off in certain keys. As far as how the mechanism works, all these pipes have air pushed through them by an electric motor, so it's not an exact replica, since of course they didn't have electricity. It used to be pumped air. You would have a pump that you would step on with your foot. Of course, being an organ, there is limitless sustain. As long as you hold it, the note will continue to sound, and the attack is not as sharp because there's no initial pluck. It just kind of starts moving air. So just so you guys get a sense of all the different instruments and how different they are, I'm just going to play a short segment of the same piece on all the different ones, and you can hear the difference between them. The modern grand piano has a much longer sustain, partly because of the difference in pedal action, but even without pedal, the sound just continues to carry for quite a while. That's partly because the mechanics of the instrument, everything is much larger. Even the strings themselves, the hammers, the length, the depth of the instrument, the fact that it has a steel frame here. I think a good question to ask is, what do you think technique actually is? Do you think that musical ideas are informed by technique, or do you think that technique is informed by the musical ideas? A lot of people tend to think that technique drives the music, at least when I look up tutorials on YouTube about things like technique. People say, oh, you must play in this way, you have to curve your fingers like this and lift your fingers like this. But everything musical is dependent upon context. So the way you play, I believe, is determined by the idea that you have in your head. Your ears, as a musician, are the most important thing, not your hands or your fingers or the way that you play. It's like driving different cars. Say you're used to driving a four-door sedan, and then one day you have to get a rental car, and it's an SUV or a pickup truck. You wouldn't say, oh, because this feels different, it's going to ruin the way that I drive. In fact, the more profile vehicles that you drive, the better of a driver you become in the long run, because you're used to different sizes. Say you drive a U-Haul. It has different acceleration, different braking, different dimensions. So you have to become aware of those things, and it ultimately makes you better. Now, does it feel different? Of course it feels different, and it can be weird, and there's a little bit of an adjustment period. Like if you're used to driving one and then all of a sudden you drive another one, it's the same with the instruments. There is a bit of an adjustment period for going from piano to harpsichord and back, vice versa, or with the organ. But over time, you just gain a knowledge of the type of instrument you're playing, and you begin to adapt to the way that instrument sounds, and the way it sounds informs your musical ideas. The way that I like to live and the way that I like to make music, I find that life is too short to just stick to one specific thing. I'm so interested in musical culture. I think that one of the great things about the art form of music is that it can expose you to other cultures, other ideas, other subcultures, other genres, and it is endless. And what you can learn from these can only strengthen your ideas as a musician, not detract from them. So let me know what you guys think of this. If you agree, if you disagree, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.